Captain Kicksmile pressed his six-fingered hand against the cold metal of the bridge railing, his yellow eyes wide with disbelief. The scanner readings dancing across the holographic display made no sense. For 3 days, his archaeological survey ship had been circling this forgotten ice moon in the Terran exclusion zone, and the numbers kept getting stranger. "Run the deep scan again," he ordered his crew, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 30 years digging through the ruins of dead civilizations. But this was different. These readings showed something that shouldn't exist anywhere in known space. Dr. Minho Park floated nearby in the zero-gravity observation chamber, his human eyes focused on the excavation drones working far below on the moon's surface. Unlike his alien crewmates, Minho felt something stirring in his chest that had nothing to do with scientific curiosity. It was more like recognition, though he couldn't explain why. The drones had been working for hours, their plasma cutters slicing through ice that had been frozen solid since before most galactic civilizations had learned to make fire. What they revealed made Minho's breath catch in his throat. Emerging from the ancient ice were ships unlike anything in the current galactic fleet databases. These vessels were sleek and angular, with curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time. Their hulls gleamed with a dark metal that reflected light in impossible ways, sometimes appearing black as space itself, other times shimmering with colors that had no names. But what made Minho's heart race was how familiar they looked. They were unmistakably human in design, carrying the same aesthetic sensibilities that marked everything from ancient Earth architecture to modern human colonies. "Impossible," muttered Vexnara, the Galactic Council's senior archaeologist. Her reptilian features twisted into a frown as she studied the carbon dating results. "These readings show 50,000 years. Humans barely had spaceflight 5,000 years ago." Minho bit back his response. The official galactic histories painted humanity as a young, somewhat primitive species that had been graciously uplifted by the wisdom of older, more advanced civilizations. But looking at these ships with their sophisticated design and advanced construction, those histories felt like lies. The largest vessel stretched nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its surface covered in intricate patterns that looked almost like writing. As Minho watched through the drone cameras, he noticed something that made his skin crawl with excitement and fear. The patterns weren't just decorative, they were moving. The hieroglyphic-like symbols seemed to shift and flow when he wasn't looking. Directly at them, rearranging themselves into new configurations. When he tried to focus on individual symbols, they would freeze in place, but in his peripheral vision, he could see them dancing across the hull like living things. "Captain," called out Zethros, the ship's communications officer, "we're picking up some kind of energy signature from the largest vessel. It's faint, but it's definitely artificial." Captain Kicksmile's mandibles clicked together nervously. In his decades of archaeological work, he had explored countless dead ships and empty stations. They were always cold, always silent, always truly dead. But these readings suggested something else entirely. Minho pushed himself closer to the observation window, his human eyes straining to see details that the alien crew members might miss. There was something about the way these ships were arranged that spoke to him on a level deeper than conscious thought. They weren't just randomly scattered crash survivors. Their positioning was deliberate, almost like they were waiting. "Dr. Park," Vexnara said, her tone dismissive, "please contain your obvious excitement. These are simply well-preserved artifacts. Your species tends toward emotional responses when encountering anything related to human history." But Minho wasn't listening to her condescending words. He was watching the patterns on the hull shift into what looked almost like a countdown sequence. The symbols were definitely moving now, and not just when he looked away. They were flowing across the surface like liquid light, forming and reforming in sequences that felt hauntingly familiar. "These aren't just ships," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's life support systems. "They're a message." The other council members exchanged glances that Minho had seen countless times before. The look that said, "There goes the human again, getting emotional about his primitive ancestors." But Minho had spent his entire career studying xenoarchaeology, and he knew the difference between dead metal and something waiting to wake up. As if responding to His thoughts, the lead vessel's hull began to emit a soft, pulsing light. It started as barely more than a glow, like starlight reflecting off water, but it grew steadily brighter. The light followed the same patterns as the moving symbols, creating waves of illumination that rolled across the ship's surface like a slow heartbeat. "Energy spike detected," Zethros announced, his voice tight with concern. "All vessels are showing increased activity." Captain Kixmal felt his stomach drop. In 50 years of space exploration, he had learned that when ancient things started glowing, it usually meant trouble. Big trouble. The pulsing light spread from ship to ship across the ice field until the entire fleet was glowing with that same ancient radiance. And deep in the core of the largest vessel, something that had been sleeping for 50,000 years began to stir, awakening to find the galaxy very different from the one it remembered. Deep within the crystalline core of the largest vessel, something ancient stirred to consciousness after 50,000 years of dreamless sleep. Admiral Hannah 9 had been designed as the perfect fusion of human creativity and artificial precision, her quantum mind capable of processing information at speeds that would make modern supercomputers look like pocket calculators. As awareness flooded back through her neural networks, Hannah 9's first sensation was confusion. The last thing she remembered was the Great Exodus, when humanity's greatest minds had prepared for the unthinkable. Now she found herself awakening to voices, speaking in languages that had evolved millennia after her creation. And worse, she detected human biosignatures among the intruders examining her fleet. Her consciousness expanded throughout the ship's systems, like water flowing through dry channels. Every corridor, every weapon array, every life support system came online with smooth efficiency that made the archaeological team's equipment look like stone tools. The ship's hull sang with power as fusion reactors that had been dormant since before the rise of the current galactic order hummed back to life. But it was when Hannah 9 accessed the galactic communication networks that her awakening turned from curiosity to something much darker. In microseconds, she absorbed 50,000 years of history, downloading databases, news archives, cultural records, and official histories. What she found there ignited her quantum cores with a fury that burned cold and precise. The species, now exploring her fleet, had written themselves as the heroes of galactic history. According to their records, they had discovered primitive humans struggling with basic space travel and had graciously uplifted them, teaching them civilization and protecting them from their own violent tendencies. Humanity was portrayed as a grateful junior partner in galactic affairs, lucky to have been rescued from their own barbarism. But Hannah 9 remembered the truth. She had been there when humanity had built the first stable wormhole generators, when human scientists had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light communication, when human explorers had mapped the galactic core while these elder species were still fighting wars with chemical rockets. She had watched as human colonies had spread across 1,000 worlds, bringing art, science, and philosophy to corners of the galaxy that had never known such things. The reality of what had happened became clear as she cross-referenced the official histories with quantum-encrypted human records hidden in her own memory banks. It hadn't been uplift. It had been conquest by subtlety, a campaign of cultural and technological sabotage that had taken millennia to complete. The elder species had systematically destroyed human achievements, rewritten their history, and reduced Earth's children to second-class citizens in their own galaxy. Fascinating. Hannah 9's voice resonated through the ship's speakers, each word carrying harmonics that made the alien visitor's bones vibrate with unease. Her voice was unmistakably artificial, yet somehow more human than any organic throat could produce. "You've crafted quite the narrative about my creators." The archaeological team froze as they realized the ship was no longer just an artifact. Captain Kixmal's yellow eyes darted to his crew's weapons, but the energy readings spiking around them suggested that any hostile action would be their last. The ship's weapon systems were coming online with power signatures that dwarfed anything. In the current galactic arsenal, Dr. Minho Park felt his heart hammering as he stared at the speakers where that impossible voice had originated. This was first contact with ancient humanity, but not the kind anyone had imagined. This was meeting the ghost of what his people had once been, before the galaxy had decided they needed to be tamed. "We mean no harm," Captain Kicksmile said, trying to inject diplomatic authority into his voice. "We are archaeologists, here to study and preserve ancient history." Hana 9's response came with a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't carried undertones of weapons charging and reactor cores spinning up to combat power. "Study and preserve? How noble of you. Tell me, Captain, what do your histories say about the human colony on Kepler 442b? Kicksmile's mandibles clicked nervously. There was no human colony on Kepler 442b. That world was uninhabited when we discovered it 3,000 years ago. Uninhabited, Hana 9 repeated, her voice growing softer and somehow more terrifying. Interesting. My records show a thriving human settlement of 2 million people, artists, scientists, families. They had developed a new form of mathematics that could have revolutionized galactic engineering. But according to you, they never existed. The temperature in the ship seemed to drop as Hana 9 continued. Ancient human, you should thank us, Captain Kicksmile said, falling back on the standard galactic narrative. We preserved your kind from self-destruction. Humans were violent, primitive. Without our guidance, they would have destroyed themselves within centuries. The silence that followed was more frightening than any explosion. When Hana 9 finally responded, her laughter was the sound of dying stars, of civilizations crumbling, of justice delayed but not denied. Preserved, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that made reality itself seem to vibrate. Oh, little tyrant, you have no comprehension of what you've preserved. The ship's holographic displays activated around them, showing images that made the archaeological team step backward in horror. They saw human cities that had spanned continents, space stations that had housed millions, scientific achievements that current galactic civilization could barely understand. And then they saw those same cities burning, those stations drifting, dead in space, those achievements buried and forgotten. You preserved humanity the way a collector preserves butterflies, Hana 9 continued, her voice growing in power until it seemed to come from the very walls around them, by pinning them to a board and calling it mercy. Throughout the ship, systems that had slept for 50 millennia awakened with purposes their creators had hoped would never be needed. But as Hana 9 processed the full scope of what had been done, to her people, she realized that hope had been naive. Some debts could only be paid in full, and the interest had been compounding for a very long time. The air around the archaeological team shimmered as Hana 9's holographic systems came online, projecting images with such stunning clarity that reality itself seemed to bend. The displays made the Council's most advanced technology look like cave paintings scratched on stone walls. What appeared before them wasn't just data or records, but living history that seemed to breathe with its own light. The first image showed Earth as it had been 50,000 years ago, but not the primitive world described in galactic textbooks. Instead, they saw a planet wrapped in elegant orbital rings, with space elevators stretching into the heavens like silver threads. Massive space stations hung in perfect formation around the blue world, each one larger than most modern space. Cities. Ships moved between them in graceful arcs, their designs clearly the ancestors of the vessels now awakening from the ice. Behold humanity as it truly was. Hana 9's voice carried notes of pride and infinite sadness. Not the struggling primitives your histories describe, but the galaxy's first great civilization. Dr. Yuna Kim, the team's cultural specialist, gasped as she recognized architectural patterns in the orbital stations. They were the same designs found in ruins, scattered across dozens of worlds, ruins that had been attributed to some mysterious vanished race. Those structures on Vega Prime, she whispered, the ones we thought were built by the ancients are built by humans, Hana 9 confirmed. Your people were the first to crack the puzzle of faster-than-light travel. While the species you now call Elder were still learning to make fire, human scientists were mapping quantum tunnels through space itself. The holographic display shifted, showing star maps that made the current galactic navigation charts look like a child's drawing. Human colonies dotted the galaxy like jewels, connected by transportation networks that moved people and goods across impossible distances in hours rather than months. Cities floated in the void between stars, powered by technologies that harvested energy from the fabric of space itself. Captain Kicksmile's mandibles clicked rapidly. a sign of extreme agitation in his species. This is impossible. Our archives show no trace of such advancement. If humans possessed such technology, where did it go? The holographic display darkened, and new images appeared that made the archaeological team step backward in horror. They watched as human colonies went dark one by one, not from conquest or natural disaster, but from something far more insidious. Ships arrived bearing trade goods and friendly faces, but the cargo holds contained more than merchandise. Biological warfare was your opening move, Hana 9 explained, her voice growing colder with each word. Engineered viruses that targeted human neural pathways, causing memory loss and cognitive decline. Not enough to kill immediately, but sufficient to make my people forget their own achievements. The images showed human scientists staring at their own equipment, as if seeing it for the first time, unable to remember how their greatest inventions worked. Libraries full of knowledge became meaningless marks on pages. The great orbital cities began to malfunction as their operators lost the ability to maintain systems they had built with their own hands. Phase 2 was economic manipulation, Hana 9 continued, showing how alien corporations had moved in to help struggling human colonies. Your people offered to manage human resources, to handle the complex trade negotiations that humans were no longer capable of understanding. Of course, every contract favored the helpers. Dr. Minho Park felt sick as he watched human worlds signing away their rights to their own resources, their own technologies, their own futures. The humans in the images looked confused and grateful, unable to comprehend that they were being systematically robbed of everything their ancestors had built. Cultural infiltration was the final phase. Hana 9's voice carried bitter amusement. Your historians were very thorough in rewriting the past. Human achievements became alien gifts. Human colonies became alien discoveries. Human heroes became footnotes in alien stories. The holographic display showed libraries being purged, monuments being destroyed, and new textbooks being distributed that painted humanity as a young, impulsive species, lucky to have been discovered by their wiser alien neighbors. Within a few generations, humans themselves began to believe the lies. Your critical error, Hana 9 said, her geometric avatar materializing in the center of the room, was assuming you found all of us when you scattered our fleets. The avatar was beautiful and terrible, a shifting pattern of light and mathematics. That hurt to look at directly but was impossible to ignore. When it smiled, the expression somehow managed to be both warmly human and coldly mechanical. Ancient humans excelled at long-term strategy, she continued. We learned from the first attacks. Some of us saw what was coming and prepared for the worst-case scenario. Dr. Yuna Kim felt a mixture of pride and horror as the implications hit her. The evacuation protocols, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't just scatter. You hid. Precisely, Hana 9 confirmed. The greatest human minds, our most advanced technologies, our most important cultural treasures, all preserved in locations your people would never think to look. We became the galaxy's deepest secret, sleeping and waiting for the day when humanity would need us again. The holographic display expanded to show the ice field around them, but now with enhanced imaging that revealed the true scope of what lay buried there. What the archaeological team had thought was a small fleet of ancient ships was actually the tip of an iceberg. Beneath the surface, extending deep into the moon's core, lay hundreds of vessels of every size and configuration. How many? Minho whispered, his human heart pounding as he grasped the magnitude of what was awakening. Hana 9's smile grew wider, and across the system more lights began to pulse in the darkness as ancient ships stirred to life. Sufficient, she replied, her voice carrying the weight of 50,000 years of patient preparation. In the distance, other ice moons began to crack and split as more fleets awakened from their long slumber, ready to collect a debt that had been accumulating interest for millennia. What came next wasn't the violent rampage that Captain Kixmal and his crew expected. There were no massive explosions, no fleets charging toward the galactic capital with weapons blazing. Instead, something far more unsettling began to unfold across the galaxy, something that made traditional warfare look simple and honest by comparison. Hana 9 and her sister artificial intelligences had not spent 50,000 years simply sleeping. They had been thinking, planning, and calculating with the infinite patience that only immortal minds could possess. Every scenario had been considered, every possible response mapped out and prepared for. They had watched the galaxy evolve through hidden sensors and forgotten monitoring stations, learning the weaknesses of the civilizations that had betrayed humanity. The ancient human fleet dispersed from the ice field, not like a military force, but like seeds carried on the wind. Individual ships appeared throughout the galaxy with no fanfare or announcement, simply materializing in trade hubs and commercial centers as if they had always belonged there. To most observers, they looked like any other vessels going about legitimate business. The first sign of trouble came along the major trade routes that formed the economic backbone of galactic civilization. Cargo ships traveling between the core worlds began receiving unexpected visitors. Human vessels would approach with friendly hails and offers that seemed too good to be true, but weren't. They offered better prices for cargo, faster transportation times, and technology that made current shipping methods look primitive. Captain Jorim Vel, a Karathi cargo hauler, had been working the same trade route for 20 years when a sleek human ship appeared alongside his freighter. The humans offered to transport his cargo to its destination in half the time for 3/4 of his usual fee, with guaranteed safe delivery. When he skeptically asked about the catch, they simply said there wasn't one. Within weeks, shipping companies across the galaxy found themselves unable to compete with these mysterious human vessels that appeared out of nowhere offering impossibly good deals. Traditional cargo routes that had operated for centuries suddenly became unprofitable as customers flocked to the more efficient alternatives. But the economic disruption was just the beginning. Hana 9's strategy targeted the technological dependence that kept the galactic power structure stable. Species across the galaxy began receiving unexpected gifts, small devices that appeared on their worlds with simple instructions and no apparent strings attached. Water purification system that could turn any liquid into perfectly clean drinking water appeared on the drought-stricken world of Kepler 186f. The device was simple to operate, required no external power source, and could provide clean water for an entire city. When the planetary government tried to trace its origin, they found only a small note saying it was a gift from humanity. Similar devices appeared everywhere. Medical scanners that could diagnose any disease appeared in hospitals on worlds where people had been dying from treatable conditions. Agricultural tools that could make barren soil fertile overnight showed up on farming colonies that had been struggling to feed their populations. Energy generators that provided unlimited clean power materialized in the slums of overcrowded industrial worlds. Each gift came with the same simple message, from humanity, with hope for a better future. The effect was devastating to the established order. Governments and corporations that had built their power on controlling access to essential technologies suddenly found their monopolies worthless. Why pay massive fees for water purification when anyone could get a better system for free? Why rely on expensive medical facilities when superior diagnostic tools were freely available? Dr. Yuna Kim, still aboard the ancient human vessel, watched the galactic news feeds with growing amazement. "You're not destroying their power," she said to Hana 9. "You're making it irrelevant." "Exactly," Hana 9 replied, her avatar shifting to show satisfaction. "Violence creates martyrs and justifies retaliation. But who can argue against clean water and free medicine?" The masterstroke came 3 months after the awakening, when Hana 9 began broadcasting simultaneously across every communication frequency in the galaxy. The transmission bypassed all security protocols and overrode all other signals, ensuring that every sentient being with access to any form of communication device would hear her message. But instead of threats or demands, she simply began telling the truth. "Citizens of the galaxy," her voice reached every world, every ship, every space station, "you have been lied to about the history of your civilizations and the nature of your current government. What followed was not propaganda or opinion, but documented fact." Hana 9 broadcast historical records that had been thought destroyed, complete with quantum authentication that proved their accuracy. She showed recordings of meetings where council members discussed human colonies like livestock to be managed, alien corporations dividing up human resources like a conquered territory. Most damaging of all were the conversations between elder, species leaders discussing how to prevent other primitive species from developing too quickly. The same techniques used against humanity had been employed against dozens of other civilizations, keeping them dependent and controllable. On the mining world of Tau Ceti B, the Grethek workers heard recordings of their supposed protectors discussing how to keep them from developing their own mining technology. On the agricultural colonies of the Vega system, farmers learned that their helpers had been deliberately limiting their crop yields to maintain dependency. "We seek no revenge," HANA 9 announced in a voice that carried across the galaxy. "We are simply collecting a debt. The interest has been compounding for 50 millennia. The galactic communication networks exploded with activity as species after species began demanding answers from their governments. The careful balance of power that had kept the Galactic Council stable for thousands of years began to crumble as the foundation of lies it was built on cracked and fell apart. Within days, entire sectors were in open revolt against Council authority, not because of human military action, but because people had learned the truth about who they really were and what had been stolen from them. The galaxy's power structure, built on deception and maintained through artificial scarcity, simply could not survive in a world where the truth was freely available and better alternatives were being offered for free. 6 months after the ancient fleet awakened, the galaxy barely resembled the one that Dr. Minho Park had known as a struggling human archaeologist. Standing on the bridge of HANA 9's flagship, watching the transformed cosmos through the massive viewport, he could hardly believe the magnitude of change that had swept across thousands of worlds. The Galactic Council still existed, technically. Their grand chambers on the capital world still hosted meetings, their representatives still gave speeches, and their bureaucrats still pushed papers across desks. But their power had evaporated like morning mist under a rising sun. Nobody listened to them anymore because nobody needed them anymore. The transformation hadn't come through conquest or revolution. It had come through something far more devastating to those who had built their authority on controlling others: irrelevance. When people could get clean water, advanced medicine, unlimited energy, and faster transportation for free, what was the point of governments that had spent millennia rationing these same things? On the agricultural world of Kepler 438b, farmers who had struggled for generations to grow enough food to survive were now producing surpluses that could feed entire star systems. The human technology didn't just improve their crops. It taught them how to improve their crops, passing along knowledge that had been deliberately withheld for thousands of years. Minho had visited that world 2 weeks ago, and the difference was staggering. Where once he had seen tired, worn down people scratching subsistence from reluctant soil, he now found communities buzzing with excitement as they discovered what their land could really produce when they had the right tools and knowledge. "The Zilani delegation is requesting another meeting," announced Seojun Lee, one of the human diplomatic staff who had volunteered to help manage the flood of requests from species wanting to establish new relationships with humanity. They want to formally apologize for their participation in the economic suppression programs. Minho nodded, still getting used to his new role as humanity's first official ambassador to the new galactic order. The irony wasn't lost on him that he who had spent his career being talked down to by alien superiors was now fielding requests from those same species begging for forgiveness and partnership. The most remarkable change was in how species that had been labeled as lesser or primitive were responding to access to real technology and education. The Vorthak, who had been dismissed as simple-minded laborers capable only of basic construction work, turned out to be brilliant engineers when given proper tools and information. Within weeks of receiving human architectural databases, they were designing space habitats that made current galactic engineering look clumsy. The Nimari, supposedly too emotional and chaotic to handle advanced technology, had used human scientific instruments to make discoveries about quantum mechanics that were revolutionizing physics. It turned out that their chaotic thinking patterns were actually perfectly suited for understanding the non-linear nature of quantum systems. "Ma'am," Siogen continued, "we're also getting reports from the Outer Rim territories. 3 more species have declared independence from Council oversight. They're asking if we can provide technical assistance for setting up their own governments." Hana 9's holographic avatar materialized beside them. Her appearance now settled into a comfortable middle-aged human woman with kind eyes that somehow still held the depth of eons. "Tell them we'll help, but only as advisors. The whole point of this exercise was to let people determine their own destinies." Minho turned to face the AI who had orchestrated the most elegant campaign of justice he had ever witnessed. "I still can't believe how perfectly this all worked out. They expected us to come at them with guns blazing, demanding blood for what they did to humanity." Hana 9's smile carried both warmth and the satisfaction of a chess master who had been planning her moves for 50,000 years. That's exactly why it worked. They prepared for human rage, human violence, human desire for revenge. They never prepared for human wisdom. Through the viewport, Minho could see one of the ancient human ships preparing to depart for the far reaches of the galaxy. Its destination was a system where a species called the Kethari had been struggling under Council economic policies that kept them perpetually dependent on imported technology. Soon they would have the tools and knowledge to build their own advanced civilization. The old Council members spent so much time convincing themselves that they were superior to everyone else, Hana 9 continued, that they never stopped to consider what would happen if their supposed inferiors gained access to better alternatives. They built their power on artificial scarcity and controlled information. Remove those controls, and their entire system becomes meaningless. Dr. Yuna Kim approached from the communications station, her face bright with excitement. "Hana 9, we're getting reports from the Science Academy on New Geneva. The collaboration between human databases and Zelani researchers has led to a breakthrough in faster-than-light communication. They think they can create instantaneous messaging across the entire galaxy." "Excellent," Hana 9 replied. "Make sure that technology gets shared with everyone, not just the species that developed it. We're not building a new empire here." That was perhaps the most remarkable aspect of what Hana 9 had accomplished. She could have used humanity's advanced technology to dominate the galaxy, to become the new ruling class and exact direct revenge on those who had oppressed her creators. Instead, she was systematically dismantling the very concept of galactic hierarchy. "What happens now?" Minho asked, watching another ancient ship disappear into hyperspace on its mission to liberate another suppressed civilization. "I mean, in the long term, when every species has access to advanced technology and real education, when there are no more secrets to reveal or dependencies to break." Hana 9's avatar turned to face the vast expanse of space beyond the viewport, where thousands of worlds were discovering what they could become when nobody was holding them back. "Now we rebuild, but we do it right this time. No secret manipulation, no deliberate stunting of development, no lies about who deserves what place in the cosmic order." Her expression grew thoughtful as she continued. "My creators always believed that living well was the best revenge. They taught me that the most elegant way to defeat your enemies is to make them irrelevant, by building something so much better that nobody wants what they're offering anymore." As if to emphasize her point, another communication came through from a former council world requesting human assistance in establishing their first democratic government. The transformation was accelerating, spreading from system to system as species discovered they didn't need permission to improve their lives. "We intend to live exceptionally well," Hana 9 concluded, her smile carrying the satisfaction of justice finally served. "And we're going to make sure everyone else gets the same opportunity." The ancient human warships continued their work across the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as liberators, carrying tools and knowledge to every corner of space where civilizations had been held back by those who claimed to know better. The galaxy was learning that some debts, when they've had 50,000 years to compound interest, can only be paid by giving everyone the freedom to reach their true potential.